This regular meeting, the public budget hearing of the Columbus Municipal School District. Here we have a quorum established today. Now, if I could, I'll ask Ms. Verdell, would you ask our invocation, please? Thank you.
May we bow to pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day, Lord. We thank you for giving us the ability to come out today. Lord, we ask right now that you would give us the knowledge, the wisdom, and the courage to make decisions that are pleasing in your sight. Lord, that you allow us to make decisions that are best for the children of this district and everybody who is impacted by this district across our community. Lord, right now we just give you thanks and all the praises and all the honor. In your Son, Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Now please rise with me. Attention, salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to thank everyone for coming out tonight. Now we go to our next item on tonight's agenda, which is number 3, adoption of the agenda. We have one item, which is our budget hearing. I need a motion for approval, please.
So moved. Second.
Has been motioned by Dr. Shoemake, has been seconded by Ms. Verdell. Is there any discussion? Being no discussion, all in favor, please signify with your right hand. It is unanimous. Now we go to item number 4, our 2017-18 CMSD budget public hearing document review. Dr. Hickman, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, and we're going to have Mrs. Holmes present. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hickman. Mr. President, Dr. Hickman, members of the Board of Trustees, first and everyone in the audience this evening, I want to thank you, Mr. President, Dr. Hickman, members of the Board of Trustees, for all of your input in this budget that we have consolidated and prepared for review. Also want to thank the members of our management team who was also very instrumental in preparing tonight's budget. At this time, I would also like to thank our city councilman, the mayor, and Mr. Greg Andrews as well for their help and input in tonight's budget that you will see. For tonight, I will be presenting the FY18 budget for the Columbus Municipal School District. In this budget presentation that I'll provide to you, we'll discuss some generalities about the district as well as explain some of the acronyms that you will hear throughout the presentation so that you will be familiar with those items. Also, I want to highlight some of the things that are really primary drivers for the resulting budget numbers that you will see. So we will do a review of those and highlight some of those things in tonight's budget presentation as well. Also, we'll take an in-depth look at the tax levy. We will have an analysis of the tax levy that we're requesting for FY18 fiscal year. And also we'll look at the revenue projections, the expenditures, how we expect to spend those monies during the school year, and also those budget categories that comprise our budget along with pie charts that we will see. It's just some general information about the district based on FY18 budget. We do expect a little bit lower than 4,000 students to be enrolled in CMSD through our pre-K through 12th grade grades. Our projected number of staff is still right at 500 employees we expect to employ. And our average student-teacher ratio for the year that we're projecting is going to be 25 students per instructor per class for all of our elementary school locations and up to 150 students per instructor for our higher level grades, CMS and CHS school locations. Okay, some of our goals for fiscal management here at CMSD. The first thing is that we want to establish a certain level of funding that will be required to help us provide a high quality education for our students. That is one of our primary goals, making sure we have the appropriate funding, establishing and identifying what those funding sources are so that we can provide the best education for our students. Secondly is to use the best available techniques for budget development and management. That's meetings and latest data, etc. To maintain a district maintenance fund balance of at least 7% of our district revenues. So whatever we receive in revenues, we want to maintain at least 7% of those revenues as a part of our fund balance, or what some may say as our savings. And ultimately to be physically responsible and transparent to all of our stakeholders, to our students, to the community, to our taxpayers, to all of the people who have stake in this district. We want to be physically responsible for the monies that we receive and to be transparent with those expenditures that those funds are allotted. Just some of the explanations for the acronyms that you will hear as I continue throughout the presentation is you'll quite often hear MAEP, and of course that's the Mississippi Adequate Education Program. EEF, those educational enhancement funds, those are for bus purchases, renovations, and things of sort that we receive from the state, and also classroom supplies. IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities and Education Act, or what we call SPED for short. You'll hear that quite often throughout the presentation as well. QZAB, Qualified Zone Academy Bonds. Also, you'll hear Qualified School Construction Bonds, better known as our QSCAB, and these bonds can be used for new construction only, whereas the other one can be used, the QZAB can be used for renovations, etc., repairs, and so on. The general obligation bonds you'll also hear throughout the presentation. One of the main drivers that affected our resulting numbers for our budget at this time is our MAEP allocation. And that allocation decreased nearly $1 million down to $17.9 million from the previous year. Now, MAEP, the constant stickler with MAEP is that we're constantly being underfunded. And again, the district has seen that same issue result. We are being underfunded by $1.7 million again this year. Also, over the last couple of years, combined, the district has seen $2.3 million in total MAEP cuts. And we've been underfunded over $3 million just over these last 2 fiscal years. So we have not received $2.3 million that we normally would have received from the state of Mississippi for MAEP. Also, one of the main drivers that we've seen with this year's budget is that our Title I allocations. Title I Part A, we saw a drastic cut in our final allocation for Title I. We lost almost $550,000 just in Title I allocation alone. We also have not received any word on our Title II allocation at this time. Preliminary notifications are that they may possibly not be one, but that is a great impact, a negative impact on our budget again this year. So at this time, Title I allocation has been cut by $546,000, and at this time there's no final allocation or word on our Title II funds, which was $433,000 reduction that, versus last year that we'll see this year. So our total reduction in federal revenues alone was almost another $1 million. And you couple that with $1 million that we're not seeing from MAEP, so we're right at $2 million just in cuts from MAEP, the state funding source, and in federal revenues for title funds alone. So we've got a significant deficit that we had to face to try to get our budget to balance and be in a favorable position. So with that came some drastic measures and drastic things that we had to do, and one of those was actually closing of vacancies and actual cutting of positions to accommodate the shortages that we will see from federal revenues and from the State Department. So there was a total of 32 positions that were either closed or cut, and they were not just teachers, but they were paraprofessionals or people such as ATs or at-will persons as well. So there was a total total of 32 certified and paraprofessional vacancies that we cut. This resulted in a total operational cost reduction in our district maintenance of about $1.1 million, which includes salaries and fringe benefits. Also, we addressed the need of, or addressed the issue we had with transportation. We had a rapidly deteriorating fleet that was well overdue for upgrades. And so this year the board and Dr. Hickman's leadership, we closed the gap on those deficiencies with our buses. So we will see nearly $289,000 increase in our budget expenditures because of those endeavors. We'll see here the result from our Echo Ride contract the board recently approved. There was a 2.75% rate increase that came along with the renewal. The bus purchases that Echo Ride will provide was $77,211, I'm sorry. And then the fleet maintenance that the district will now incur with that contract came to a total of almost $180,000 that we would incur from the Echo Ride services for student transportation. And the master lease purchases for those 10 buses that the board has recently approved, the actual principal and interest payments comes to $109,000. So this $289,000 was an additional cost in the budget this year. We also had several staff additions that were made to address those instructional needs at some of our campuses. One of the additions came from CSA, our Columbus Success Academy. There was one math teacher added there at that location. With salary and benefits, that salary came to roughly $64,000. We also added 3 curriculum coordinators. The district will now, because of those title cuts, the district would have to pick those 3 coordinators up, and we did, to be able to enhance the instructional needs of those locations or district-wide. And those salaries came to roughly $184,000 with fringes included. Also, one smart lab teacher at Fairview was also a staff addition that was made this year to enhance our educational or instructional services at Fairview. So the total cost of our staff additions for this year was $312,000. Again, that's including salaries, fringes as well. So next is our tax request. So what drives our tax request? What are the moving pieces? And there's just 2 components, 2 pieces to the ad valorem tax request, and that's our operational cost and our debt section of the ad valorem request. This is just a sample of what the request looks like. What we have here is we start with the base calculation, and the district is at the district's discretion that we could choose any of the 3 previously completed fiscal years to determine our base. And those fiscal years are not district years. They are based on the county fiscal years, or the tax collector years, as I like to say. So a fiscal year is defined as October 1 through September 30th. And in this example, you'll see October 15th through September 2016 would be that date there. So the first thing we did for this year's budget, we decided to review look back at the 3 previously completed fiscal years to determine what our base in our worksheet request would be. To look at the base, let's go here. In determining our base, we looked at October 13 through September 14, October 14 through September 15, October 15 through September 16. And of course, with the deficit in funding that we're already looking at, or shortage in funding we were already facing, the district decided to go with the one that would leave us least adversely affected, which was the $10.5 million a year from October 2015 through September 16. So that becomes our base, the $10 million, a little over $10 million, $10.5 million here now becomes our base. The next thing is actual collections, and our actual collections in 16-17 was actually $327,000 approximately. So we've included that number here as well. So our total base now is $10.9 million roughly. We're not requesting any increase. That's at the superintendent's discretion if he so chooses to, and you will notice that there was no added amount to the base. Also for new programs, this is the amount that the state determines whether or not the district can request additional monies from the local taxpayers. This year, the CMSD, as determined by MDE, we will not be requesting any other additional monies from the local taxpayers. So that is zero as well. So a pretty clean base, which is, again, $10.9 million for operations. And that helps with everything throughout the district, from utilities to salaries to instructional needs, you name it. This covers the district-wide operational expenses for the district. Okay. Going back, we've got the base. The next section is our debt section, and this is driven by statute as well. So there are parameters and there are limitations, and there are certain things that we must follow in order to request monies to pay debt, and they have to be allowable debt that we can request on tax levy here. Okay, so for the debt, we have one 3-mil note that we're requesting $273,000 to cover principal, interest, and paying agent fees for. For the QZAB bond, $118,000 for those principal, interest payments as well as paying agent fees. GO bond, $1.9 million for a total ad valorem request of $2.3 million roughly. So our total ad valorem request at this time is roughly $13.2 million. Keep in mind that this tax levy does not take in consideration the desire and the goal that the board will have with actually refunding the portion of the GO bonds. So this is where it stands without the refunding option. Okay. So let's take a look at the refunding option. So that was the ad valorem request without the refunding option. So let's take a look at it with the refunding option. And let me just review the debt really quick as well. Okay. Long-term tax levy debt, what we can request in our tax request to the city and of the taxpayers. You'll find that we have roughly $2.8 million in long-term tax levy payments that are due for FY18. You'll notice that this particular series of GO bonds will be paying off in the new fiscal year. $300,000 will be the final payment for this particular bond. Okay, again, that's $2.8 million roughly, $2.2 million for principal payments, $523,000 for interest, and $12,000 that we have budgeted for the paying agent fees. So, what does the tax request comparison at this time looks like versus our final FY17 request? Okay, for the FY17 request, the final number was 11 million or 54 meals roughly for operations that we requested last year. 1.5 million for debt, or 7.35 meals, for a total of approximately $12.5 million that we requested in our final submission to the tax levying authority in last year's budget request. For this year's current request, without the refunding option, we're looking at a $10.9 million request for operations, $2.2 million or 11 meals for debt, for a total of 13.2 meals, or roughly 64 meals, and that again excludes the refunding of the GO bond series, and with an estimated meal value of $206,000. That's what our tax request comparison would look like without the refunding option. But with the refunding option, you'll see a drastic reduction in our requests for debt. $1.4 million for this GO bond, whereas before, without the refunding option, it was $1.9 million approximately. So we would see roughly about $507,000 in savings for principal and interest that we would otherwise require from the taxpayers. But you'll see with the impact of the refunding option of the GO bond series, the district would save substantial amount of money because we would only be paying $217,000 for interest in our FY18 fiscal year. So that would leave us substantial savings of $507,000 there. Okay, going back here, so you'll see again the net effect of the refunding option would be $12.7 million roughly. Again, a savings of a little over $500,000. Okay, so what would be some of the benefits of refunding? Why would we even want to consider refunding of our GO bond series? Well, first of all, it would significantly reduce the district's cash outlay. It will reduce the monies we have to immediately put out for repayment of our debt. And secondly, it will control any fluctuation in our tax requests and bills reserved for larger principal and interest payments. Again, it will control any fluctuation where the tax request that we're submitting on the taxpayers is not constantly moving up and down. There is constant control or some control in the fluctuation, and it allows us to build reserve for those larger payments that would become due in the future. You'll see here how with this current scenario that we have, and it's just a preliminary scenario, but you'll see that we will be building cash in these years for those larger payments in those latter years as that particular GO bond series mature, and that series 2009-A. Okay, so our ad valorem tax request comparison with the refunding option versus without. Without, again, we're requesting 10.9 in operations because that's not going to be impacted by the refunding option. $2.2 million, we're currently what we're seeing without the refunding. Again, that's $13.2 million. But with the refunding option, you'll see there's the drastic savings here for the taxpayers. So $12.7 million versus $13.2 million. Again, nearly $500,000 savings with the refunding option. Oops. So if the refunding is successful, this could possibly mean no increase to the taxpayers from CMSD. Again, if the refunding option that the board and Dr. Hickman are currently reviewing is successful, this could possibly mean no tax increase to the taxpayers from CMSD. Okay? So what are our revenues? What are our financial sources for the district? Where do our monies come from that allow us to operate and educate our children? Our revenues originate from various sources. We have local sources, we have state sources, and in our local sources, they're primarily made of the local taxes that you guys pay or we pay, the income earned interest earned at the banks, food sales in our cafeterias, rentals, any donations that the public make, and of course our athletic events are all some of our local sources. Our state sources, our primary state source of funding is, of course, MAEP. We do get homestead exemption reimbursements for those taxpayers who want to be exempted from ad valorem taxes. We do get reimbursed for that loss that we would suffer on that. Vocational and EEF monies, again, are some of our state revenues. Federal revenues, we have title funds that assist us with instructional needs of the district, also technological needs of the district, and USDA reimbursements, that's our child nutrition or our school lunch reimbursements that we receive from the federal government. Of course, IDEA, E-rate, and TVA in lieu of taxes. And we do have a small portion, but 16th section revenues as well makes up our budget. And those are the lease payments and the interest earned on our 16th section properties that the district owns throughout the city. So our total revenues for FY18 stands at $40.8 million. You'll see that the local sources make up $13.2 million, state sources $19.5 million, federal sources $8.1 million, and then our 16th section sources $28,000 roughly to make up that $40.8 million. Versus last year, you'll see that there is a drastic reduction in our revenues, and that's $1.7 million reduction. And of course, federal sources and the state sources are the main drivers for those reductions. MAP cuts and then federal cuts are the main drivers there. So, that's weird. Okay, for the $40.8 million that you see there for total revenues. Let's see, get to that page. Okay, that actually should be 48%, and 48% of our district revenues come from our state sources, MAEP and of sort. So that's nearly half of our budget of this $40 million we get from the State Department. Next, this category here is our local sources, and this is roughly 32%. That's what the local taxpayers contribute, or what we see at gate receipts, et cetera, interest and things from the bank. So that makes up about 30%, 32% of the budget of this $40 million. 48% again comes from the state sources, 20% from federal, and a slither here is from our 16th section revenues. Just to break down and look at the local revenues in detail, again, the local revenue sources total $13.2 million. You'll see that the ad valorem request as it currently stands without the refunding option is $12.8 million. That would be the total request. And that's an increase of nearly $700,000 because of the $1.2 million that the district put into paying the debt last year. So that's what's driving the difference here, that there is no consideration for the same in the new budget year. For food service sales, you'll see a reduction of $61,000. That's primarily to true up what the true sales or trends are that we're seeing in food service sales. So we're seeing a drastic reduction in food service sales throughout the district. In other local revenues, increase of about $15,000, I'm sorry, for local revenues, and that's primarily from technology fees that we'll see. We're adding an additional 300 MacBooks. So primarily the MacBooks is the driver. The MacBook fees that we will collect will be the main driver for the $15,000 that you see. Now we do expect fewer gate receipts this year, so with larger money generating games away from the district this year. So we will see some reduction there in our gate receipts. Okay, for our local revenues, the pie chart here, you'll see that 97% of our local revenues come from our local ad valorem tax request. In other words, it comes from our taxpayers. 3% from other sources, local sources here, and then a small sliver from less than 1% from food service sales. So that shows that 97% of our local revenues come from our taxpayers. For our state revenues, $19.5 million roughly, you'll see that MAP, EEF funds, homestead exemption reimbursement, vocational ed, and other state revenues comprise this $19.5 million. Now you'll see here that this $900,000 approximately reduction in revenues, main driver again is our MAP cuts that we're seeing versus last year. Homestead reimbursement, this is just a truer picture. These are actual numbers. So it just showed that there was a downward trend in our homestead exemption reimbursements and other state revenues. This is driven by about for lesser funds for our ed and res requests that we will make for this year. So we do have education in residence that the state supplies to Cook and to Sale Elementary, and we will be requesting just a tad bit fewer monies to operate or to pay those particular personnel members in this new fiscal year. Pie chart wise, you'll see that MAEP makes up 91% of our state revenues. So it's a substantial portion of what we receive from the state to operate and educate our children. It is the Mississippi Adequate Education Program funds. Also, you'll see compared to EF, Voc Ed, Homestead Exemption, and other revenues, these are all minimal compared to what we receive from the state for MAEP. Onto our federal revenues, $8.1 million, and child nutrition, title funds, IDA, and other federal revenues make up this budget amount, such as like TVA and that sort of thing. Makes up this $500,000. Okay, you'll see here that with child nutrition, we're expected to see a slight decrease in our reimbursements that we receive from child nutrition. Some of that lends to fewer students, but also this shows the current trends that we're seeing with the reimbursement amounts that we're receiving from child nutrition. Again, the same story with Title I, Title II, Title VI. These are all driven by cuts or no allocation at all at this time. IDA, you'll see a slight increase, and that's due to more carry forward funds in IDA this year. We had some leftover funds here that we're expecting from this current year to roll forward than before. Again, other federal revenues, you'll see a slight decline here, and that's due mostly because of our TIF, our Teacher Incentive Fund. That went away, as well as 21st Century went away. So although the 21st Century program has been cut, when it was cut this fiscal year, we had only roughly $90,000 invested or requesting to be reimbursed from the feds for this fund. Okay, so that's the driver for the $94,000 reduction from no TIF funds and 21st Century funds. So pie chart wise, you'll see that child nutrition is a heavy hitter with our federal revenues that we see. 42% of our federal revenues come from child nutrition, 32% from title, and then all the other IDA makes up a very small portion, along with those other federal revenues that, like TVA, that we would see. Okay, so where do we spend those monies? That $40 million. Total expenditures is $241,407, and the fund balance makes up the difference for some of those funds that will balance the $41 million with the revenues. So we do have some fund balances and some desires to spend some of those fund balances with other within this new fiscal year to operate with. And the district does have 53 funds budgeted for the FY18 year. You'll see that $20.6 million of our budget, just under half, is for direct instructional services that we provide to our students in the classroom. Support services from administrators to janitors to cafeteria workers, those are considered to be support services. And we have roughly $14 million budgeted to assist or operate the district from that aspect in the FY18 year. Non-instructional services, $3.5 million, and then our debt service, of course, $3.1 million. And you'll see that the difference reduction of $3 million, again, for expenditures, and the instructional cuts came from those vacancies that we cut or closed for instructional services. Support services were affected as well. With the title cuts, a lot of those were support service based positions, as well as we cut janitorial staff and et cetera, those support service workers as well. So that's where you see the driver there for the negative or the decrease of $1.6 million for support services. Oops. So for our total expenditure, you can see from the pie chart that we expect to spend almost exactly half of what we get in expenditures in our classroom, directly impacting our students. And just for the support services, 34%. One thing I do want to mention is that Columbus Municipal School District is one of the lowest, has one of the lowest administrative costs in the state. We're ranked number 9 currently from the latest data that we had. We're ranked number 9 behind Lowndes County with the lowest administrative cost in the state versus the other 160 districts or so. We're ranked number 9 with the lowest support service cost. Non-instructional services, 8%. Debt services also roughly about 8% of those expenditures. For our instructional expenses, again, $20.6 million. We do have 5 elementary schools, 1 middle school, 1 one high school. We do offer gifted programs, special education services, and special education instructional needs, alternative school services, voc ed, and other special functions make up this $20 million. For elementary schools, what do we think it was going to take to operate our elementary schools? Well, pre-K through 5th grade schools, we are projecting that we would have roughly 2,000 students who will have enrolled in this new fiscal year. And we do have the magnet school concept still a part of our focus here for the FY18 year. And we have technology integrated instruction. In other words, we have technology integrated throughout our elementary schools on a daily basis per classroom. So our instructional budget to service all of our 5 elementary schools is roughly $9.4 million. For our middle schools who serve grades 6, 7, and 8, we expect to have a little over 800 students with our CMS school location next year. We will have a 6th grade gifted program for the middle school, which is a state requirement, a part of the state requirement that we have. We will support the magnet school concept, pathways to graduation, and also the focus has been to have a technology integrated instruction at our middle school as well as STEM. The instructional budget for direct classroom expenses, $3.8 million for our middle school. For our high school, we do pride ourselves on operating a comprehensive high school where we're expected to serve over 1,000 students in this new fiscal year. We offer over 90 Carnegie Unit courses, one-to-one technology with the MacBooks. Each student has his own electronic device, so that we're proud to say that one-to-one technology. Smart Lab, advanced placement courses, dual credit courses, and of course we offer athletic activities. And we do have a number of students who have enrolled at EMCC at the early college as well. So for the instructional budget for the high school, we're estimating $4.5 million to serve and educate our students at CHS. The district does have a gifted program, again, which is required by the state of Mississippi, and the gifted program serves 2nd through 6th grade students, and we expect to have over 300 students enrolled in our gifted program in this upcoming school year. The instructional budget to directly impact those students, we're looking at $363,000 for our gifted program alone. For our SPED department, we do offer speech services and other OT services, whatever the needs may be for those special needs students. We're estimating to serve over 600 students in their services in all buildings, and we do offer private placements. for a total instructional budget or expenditures of $977,000. For our alternative education or Columbus Success Academy, we do offer alternative school services. Again, this is a requirement by the state of Mississippi, and those services are offered to students at our juvenile detention center also. And we're estimating to serve about 50 students at our Columbus Success Academy in the upcoming school year. The instructional needs for those students we're estimating at $454,000. Vocational ed, we do have one vocational ed site, and that's McKellar Technology Center, of course, and it offers career education programs, those alternative programs that students who may not want to go to college, nursing and that sort of thing, CNA, I should say, and robotics and things of that nature are offered programs, or some of the programs offered at McKellar Technology Center. Again, we're expected to serve over 400 students at McKellar with our vocational education funds this year. And that's a total of $1.1 million. Other special functions or special offerings that the district provides: tutors at Palmer Home, homeless tutors, ELL tutors or English language tutors, and dropout prevention programs. And most of these services are provided through our title funding. Those instructional needs, $283,000 budgeted. Again, $20.6 million is our total instructional budget for the upcoming school year. Support services. Our support services include those student support services, general administrators, school administrators such as the principals and assistant principals, business office, who prepare the payroll, prepare the budget, transportation costs, those what we're paying for Echo Ride and other student-related travel services, operation and maintenance of the buildings and things of sort, for a total of $13.9 million budgeted for those support services for the district. For those non-instructional services such as food services, student activities, parental involvement activities, and internal mail carrier services, we're estimating $3.5 million for the district for non-instructional services. And a substantial amount of this $3 million definitely comes from food services. All these other ones are minimal compared to food service operations. Okay, for our debt services, what are the major financial obligations that we have as a district? Who do we owe? And what do those debt look like? Tax levy debt service, we're expected to incur without the refunding option $2.7 million for principal, interest, and agent fees. Long-term tax levy debt, just to give you a summary of it, you'll see that $959,000 for plus $724 plus $310, that makes up our entire GO bond request, or monies needed to pay the principal and interest payment fees, pay and agent fees. 3 mil note $458,000, QZAB $238, and $90,000 for QSCAB. And again, these payments here technically are not really considered to be principal payments. About $236,000 of this goes into a sinking fund, sort of sits there until the debt matures, and then we pay what some people may call a balloon payment, or one payment at one time. And then $60,000 of this is also a sinking fund payment, where it goes into an account and sit in reserve until that final payment becomes due. On our capital leases, you'll notice that we will incur a new lease, again, year 3 for our Apple MacBooks. The new addition will cost us roughly $334,000 in addition to the other MacBooks that we purchased in the prior 2 years. So you'll see that we've added one for the new fiscal year, and the principal and interest payments for the new MacBooks that we will be receiving shortly going to be roughly $87,000 that we would pay. So for total MacBook payments in FY18 we're looking at $303,000 roughly for principal and interest payments for those MacBooks. A newly acquired bus lease purchase, we just acquired 10 school buses. $900,000 roughly is what the issue amount was for those buses. For FY18, the district would be required to pay, again, $109,000 approximately for principal and interest for those 10 new buses. 9 of those buses are regular ed buses, and one of them is sped bus. One of them is a sped bus, sorry. Okay? So we have tax levy debt, capital leases with Apple, and a now capital lease purchase with First Southern for the buses. And that concludes the presentation tonight. I'll turn it back into the hands of Dr. Hickman or Mr. Spears.
We're going to turn it over to Mr. Spears.
Thank you very much. I want to start by thanking Dr. Hickman and his staff for working so relentlessly on not only doing the hard work of finding areas that could be cut and some areas that may have not necessarily been as easy to cut, but working to assemble that the documents and everything needed to support doing it. But then secondly, obviously continuing forward from this point on to see what we need to do to get to the final product that was presented tonight, as well as what will be completed. Now, as we kind of move into the next phase of our public hearing, there'll be 2 parts to it. The first part I would ask is that we, the board, have our chance to ask questions regarding the presentation tonight, and of course any other comments that board members would like to make. And then we'll go to the second part, which will be for any public input or questions. Now, to outline, I believe the pens and note cards are at the back table. So during this part, while we're asking questions and going through this, if you would like to write your name as well as your question, please do so. And if you want to hand it to Ms. Holmes, if that would be okay to collect them, then we will address that at that particular point here in the meeting. So if we could, let us start by board. Is there any comments or questions that you would like to start with for Dr. Hickman or Ms. Holmes? No, I would respect that. No, that's board. Anyone? Okay, Ms. Burdell?
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Holmes, for your thorough presentation, as always. I do have a question. I heard you make reference to that a portion of the monies, the revenue, was going to be taken from fund balance, and I think that's about $395,000. Do we know Dr. Hickman was driving that, and why we're choosing to pull money from fund balance rather than making a request for it?
Let me clarify. When I say fund balance, I'm sorry, I didn't explain. But it's not from our district fund balance. Some of the other accounts carry forward monies each year that they don't spend. They budget to spend. So, say, for example, like with Title, they'll budget to spend $900,000, but they don't.
So I got you. So it was just you just misspoke.
Yes.
So the funds that are left over from the balances that are left over from different funds, but not from fund balance.
No, ma'am. Not
Yeah,
from district
not from
fund
1050.
We
balance.
had that conversation back.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you for that clarification. And Ms. Burdell, any other questions on that part?
Not right
All
now.
right. Dr. Shoemake, I just have a couple questions. In going through on slide 5, and you were outlining the EEF, which is the Educational Enhancement Funds. Are those the funds that are pledged for the debt payoff?
Absolutely.
At this particular point that MAEP continues to give to us, because we did in years past, before I'm sure anyone on this board was here, made the pledge to the debt. Okay. And what debt is it pledged to pay now?
Yes, sir. The EEF funds, each year the district has pledged $188,000 towards paying the 3 mil note. So a portion of the payments that we make on that, the monies come from the State Department because of those pledged funds. Yes,
Okay.
sir, that is correct.
And so when the $3 million note is paid off in, it looks like April of 2019, then we can recommit that to another debt, which could be our GO bond debt or whatever at that time we wish to do, the $188,000. That money could at that point be redirected to the bond, because I know that's some of the talk that we've had, but that money could continue to come to us if we do it.
You're absolutely right, Mr. Spears. Once that particular note matures, the board can elect to identify another debt that they would like those funds to be pledged towards, and then the state will make those adjustments, and we will be notified that
Okay.
they're fully pledged.
All right. Now, in your other point on budget highlights, you were talking about the MAP allocation and the decrease of and underfunding and such. Does that account for the amount that we lose when we have students that go to GTEX? So the amount that decreased by $1 million, part of that $1 million is money that we lose by students that end up leaving our district to go to the GTEX program.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Correct. Approximately what I've seen over the last year or two is that we lose about $60,000 to $80,000 per year when students attend GTEC. Yes, sir, that's correct.
And so with us going into students going from our system to that program, they're going to year 3, I believe. So that would basically mean about ballpark at $180,000, give or
Roughly.
take, roughly
Yeah,
between 150.
I would say about what I'm seeing in actual numbers. I think just this year alone, there was only like 13 students that actually attended. The final numbers that were cut from our allocation was only like $65,000, which was surprising for those 13 students.
Okay.
So if we have another 5 to 10 students, so I would say roughly 100, maybe a little over $100,000.
Okay.
Ballpark.
But then I think Dr. Hickman has mentioned before, there's additional cost of busing. So
Correct.
the extra $20,000 or
Correct.
$30,000 on top of that.
Yes, sir.
And then the other part to the MAP cuts, how much because I know in past, enrollment, it's been at 4,500 and 4,200, it's been declining, and now we're at 3,988. So that also plays into that decrease in the amount of funding that we receive from the state as well.
Yes, sir, you're absolutely correct. The enrollment, the total number, let's say, for example, you did mention 4,500 students. Let's say we have 45 students enrolled. Although they may be enrolled, but what the state calculates our allocation upon is what's your average daily attendance.
Right.
How many students really are showing up, being at school for the majority or the required amount of time for the instructional time. So they base it not on enrollment, but actually on the average number of students who's coming to school each day.
And we talked about
So
that.
we may say
Right.
you may have 4,500 students, but if only 4,300 show up, then that's what the state will give us the allocation for.
Well, and that leads me to my point, and I'm glad you stressed that, is that when we as a board continue to look at the absenteeism that continues to prevail in our district, that drives home the amount that we're losing in funding more than when we look at a budget number and see we have 3,900 students or so that are in the district. When we go through December and January and the numbers keep dropping off and the absenteeism continues to happen, then that's what's creating this more of a decrease in our allocation throughout the year. Okay. The next question is going to your Title I, I think it's the page 7 budget highlights. And you mentioned,
Can I? I'm
yes,
sorry, can I?
sure, go ahead.
I just want to add to what you're saying. And you're right, though. I mean, everything you said was correct, but they take those numbers from, I think, 3 months or 2 months. So a lot of districts kind of do a push for attendance during those months, and we're not doing a good job of that either. But you're right, though. It's the in order to plan for that budget, we have to look at the chronic absenteeism of those students, especially during those times. And we talked about that because remember, with the changing form or the formula that the state, no, it wasn't the state, but that organization tried to propose was to eliminate that and look at your total enrollment, but it didn't go through.
Well, and I think that's the key is and I don't know if it's because I have been told that they say October, November, and December is when they look at their enrollment. But I mean, obviously, that's just a guessing game. So certainly, if we look at the,
Random sample.
well, exactly. And so if we look and see, well, okay, if one of our sample times happens to be at one of the times that we have the highest absenteeism, well, then certainly, if it's the push for the month, I mean, certainly we're pushing every month, every day to get students in the classroom. But, I mean, just whatever strategy's there. But, you know, that contributes. A lot of people don't realize that contributes to the decline in money that we have here to work with throughout the year. But going to my question on the federal dollars, you'd mentioned a decrease in the Title I Part A of $546,000, and so far no Title II. And I'm certain that hinges on a lot of what is going on in Washington, D.C., but could that projection change to the good in the sense is that as we go through this year, we may actually have some of that funding restored? I mean, I know that's asking you.
No,
for,
I would just say, from what I'm hearing, this is just talk.
Sure.
I wouldn't,
Okay.
not on anything.
It's not something that we're counting on, but
Yes.
they do waver back and forth to what talks about the Title II.
Yeah.
But as of right now, they did tell us, don't count on it.
Don't count on it.
But I don't know if you heard, but I also heard kind of wavering back and forth that a little bit of it may be released, but we were told don't budget for it.
But possibly mid-year we could review just to see if maybe the wind has turned in our favor. Now, the other part is I know that under the 32 certified paraprofessionals, 29, because 3 were added back at a district cost of the curriculum coordinators. And the one thing that stuck out to me, and I may have misread, but as far as nurses, for example, at
It was
Cook,
there.
is that the location where we have our severe and profound students with disabilities, or
What
what
you're saying is that what we did was we had to cut the nurses, total amount of nurses. Say if there were 7 nurses, we
Right.
brought it down to 4. And then they're strategically placed at certain buildings, and then they will still rotate. So right now, for instance, Cell's nurse rotate between Cell and Fairview. It would just be that kind of rotation pattern with other schools. And obviously, we would look at the higher need schools where that person can be housed or maybe spend 3 out of the 5 days or something like that. And so it was just based off the numbers. But then I just got out of a meeting earlier today. I don't know the total name of the meeting, but it deals with the Air Force Base and the community members. And we're all getting together. And part of ours is I'm on the Learn Committee. And the initiative that we're still trying to put forth is work with the base and the local hospitals and clinics to see if we can, and schools, universities, to see if we can have nurses kind of rotate in, or nurses students. I know the base, there are some legality issues because their nurses are not necessarily, they're covered under malpractice, but they're not necessarily Mississippi licensed when they step off the base. And so now we're looking at the local hospitals and the universities to try to fulfill some of those roles, and to try to, we talked about a kind of a health clinic. Mississippi State did say, and this is all preliminary early talks, but Mississippi State, I'm sorry, the W did say that they have a clinic, and they may make that available not only to their students, but our students to be seen, and some of our teachers as well. So we're still trying to fill that void, but I know what you're saying. You're saying that there are buildings where there's a higher concentration of special education kids, and actually that's going to be different this year, because where Cook and I think Stowe Spirit were the only buildings that had resource and had that. Now we're going to put resource at every building to kind of spread it out, and so those numbers may fizzle down and that person's true rotation, but it's going to be based off the data. It's not going to just be kind of willy-nilly. But that's one of the, like you said, one of the hard things that we had to look at and do.
Well, thank you for that.
Which affects attendance. I mean,
Yes.
everything that you said, those things are affected, but we're trying.
The other couple questions that I have, one's going to the budget, student transportation cost. And I just want to highlight one of the parts that I think were negotiated in with the new contract with Echo Ride, You have fleet maintenance, $50,000, but I believe it is that after the first $150,000. So while we have $50,000 allocated, I believe that we actually have to go through $150,000 in repairs before that 50 would kick in and we have to pay. And with the amount of new buses coming in, maybe we will stay under that threshold. We hope, even without the new buses. But that $50,000 may be some left over if we don't go into it. And let's see here. And I think as far as the other things I had questions about are looking at page 18, which is the long-term debt or tax levy debt summary. And it's basically looking at our maturity dates. As you pointed out in your presentation, the GO bonds, the 2009B bonds will be paid off this year. So that $310,000, once we go into the next budget year, will be freed up to reallocate to other debts. And then as we go into the next school year, 2019, then we will pay off additional debt, which will include the $3 million note. And so out of the $458,000, $188,000, I believe, is the EEF
Correct.
funds, and then the remaining balance is what we pick up. So those two can be consolidated, and then the QZAB fund that's being paid into the sinking fund, this building up that will be retired at July the 15th, the last payment, July 15th of 19.
Correct.
So certainly over the next year or two, we'll get a lot more traction with respect to the debt side of things that have been such a mountain to climb. So, and so, you know, that's pretty much all the questions I have with respect to the expenditures in the presentation. But
May I make a statement?
yes, Dr.
Okay.
Hickman.
Yeah, and I just want to put something on our radar as a board. And I've been talking with Lynn Wright at the county, because we had our significant reduction in our assistant teachers. Some of them have been in the district for a considerable amount of time. Like one lady was 13 years, and so her child has been in our district from kindergarten all the way up to 8th grade, and she had 3 children, so she has some younger children, and therefore she doesn't live in our district. And so because she doesn't work here anymore, then her children will have to go back to the county, and she doesn't want that. She wants her children to stay in our district. So I'm working with Lynn Wright to see how that can work, because, I mean, there's obviously policy issues and other things. But, you know, my heart goes out to a child that has to change, you know, schools abruptly after being in a school for, 12 or 13 years. So that's just on the radar to think about as a board, that we can probably put our heads together and work with the county school district and board to figure out an amicable way that's still legal, doesn't put us in any kind of situations, but we still are able to put children first and support that.
Thank you for that. Board members, are there any other questions or comments regarding the presentation?
Yes. No, I just want to thank both Ms. Holmes for leading this. Great job. Thank you, Dr. Hickman. Very impressive.
Thank you.
That's very good. Now we'll go to the second part of tonight's meeting, which is any comments or questions that the public may have, or questions they may have regarding the presentation tonight. Do we have any individuals who would like to submit their question? Ms. Holmes, you knocked it out of the park. You answered all the questions first go round. Great job. Well, if there is none at this particular time, certainly I feel that Dr. Hickman would entertain if someone were to have a question later on, if they would like to submit that to him and he could get that question answered, we will be sure to do it. And, if there's no additional comments or questions, then we can move to our next item on tonight's agenda. Okay? So, Board, the next item on tonight's agenda is item number 5. I need a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Has been moved by Ms. Friedel. Do I have a second? Has been seconded by Dr. Shoemake. Any discussion? Being no discussion, all in favor, please signify with your right hand. It is unanimous. We are adjourned.